Today's video lesson is found on page 8 of our Chapter 1 notes. Factor by grouping. When a polynomial has 4 terms, we will factor by grouping. The steps are to split the polynomial into first 2 terms, then the second 2 terms. We'll do that by drawing a line after the first 2 terms. Next, you factor out the greatest common factor of each set of 2 terms. What remains in both parentheses should be equal. Write what remains in parentheses followed by the 2 GCFs in their own set of parentheses. So for example, x to the third minus 4x squared plus 2x minus 8. This is 4 terms, so we're factoring by grouping. So we group the first 2 terms, so we draw a line after the first 2 terms. I'll copy down the operator that follows, plus. Now look at the first 2 terms. What's their greatest common factor here? It's x squared. Factor out x squared, and our other factor is x minus 4. Now look at the second 2 terms here. What's their greatest common factor? It's 2. Factor out 2, and the other factor is x minus 4. X minus 4, which is in parentheses, is the same as it should be. So x minus 4 is one of our final factors. And what's left outside, the x squared plus 2, is our other factor. And that's done. That's factored completely. Next, number 2, 2x to the third minus 3x squared minus 4x plus 6. Group the first 2 terms, so draw a line after the second term of the 4. Copy down the operator. Now, what's the greatest common factor of 2x to the third minus 3x squared? It's simply x squared. Factor out x squared, and we get 2x minus 3 in parentheses. Now, the greatest common factor of 4x plus 6, well, it's going to be 2. Pull out 2, but now there's that subtraction in front. So think of this as negative 2. So that if you factor out a negative 2 from negative 4x plus 6, the resulting binomial would be 2x minus 3. Right? Check that. If I take negative 2 times 2x, I get negative 4x. Negative 2 times negative 3 would result in positive 6. Okay, so what's inside the parentheses is the same. That's one of our final factors. And then what's left outside, the x squared minus 2, is our other factor. And this is factored completely. Next, our third example, 5x to the third minus x squared minus 5x plus 1. 4 terms. Right away, you're thinking grouping. You draw a line after the second term of the 4. Copy down the operator that follows, so we don't forget about that sign. The greatest common factor of the first 2 terms here is x squared. And we get 5x minus 1 in parentheses. And the only thing common here is 1. So pull out 1, and then in parentheses, again, but this is a negative 1, so that would be 5x minus 1, right? Because negative 1 times 5x would be negative 5x. Negative 1 times negative 1 would result in positive 1. Okay, so 5x minus 1 is the same in both parentheses, so that's one of our final factors. And then the other is what's left outside, x squared minus 1. But we're not done, right? Recognize x squared minus 1 as the difference of 2 squares, right? The difference of 2 squares. So we need to factor this further into x plus 1 times x minus 1. and bring down our other factor, 5x minus 1. Okay, now it's factored completely. Next, number 4, 3x to the third plus 18x squared minus 3x minus 18, 4 terms. Oh, but there's a GCF. There's something common to all 4, so let's factor out the 3. And we get x to the third plus 6x squared minus x minus 6. Now, the resulting 4 terms in parentheses we'll factor by grouping. Draw a line after the first 2. Copy down the subtraction operator. Factor out x squared, the GCF. We get x plus 6 in parentheses. And here the only thing that's common is 1 and x plus 6. X plus 6 is common, as it should be in both parentheses. So x plus 6 is one factor. What's left outside, the x squared minus 1, is another factor. And our greatest common factor, 3. Don't forget about that. Recognize this as being a difference of 2 perfect squares again. So that's going to factor into x plus 1 times x minus 1. Bring down the x plus 6. And I'll just put the 3. It's standard to write the number 3 out in front of your sets of parentheses instead of leaving it at the end like I had done above. So that's our final factorization. So stop the video and try the next 3 on your own. Four terms, right away you're thinking grouping. Draw a line. At the second term, copy down the operation that follows, and the GCF of 4x to the third minus 4x squared is 4x squared, x minus 1, the other factor. Common to 9x and 9 is 9. All right, if I think of that as a negative 9 times x would result in negative 9x, and negative 9 times negative 1 would result in positive 9. So x minus 1 is one factor, and then what's left outside of the parentheses, the 4x squared minus 9 is the other, but don't stop there. This is the difference of 2 squares, right? Dots. So that factors into 2x plus 3 times 2x minus 3, and bring down the factor of x minus 1. So this is factored completely. Number 2, looking at this, 4 terms, there's no GCF, so group the first 2, greatest common factor of those first 2, 16x squared. Pulling out 16x squared, our binomial is x minus 3. Let me not forget the operation minus, and now parentheses x minus 3. X minus 3 is one factor, and the other, I forgot to pull out my 1 there. Let's show that. And the other factor is what's outside, the 16x squared minus 1. But again, that's the difference of 2 squares. So factor that further. 4x plus 1 times 4x minus 1. And bring down x minus 3. So there we have the factorization of our polynomial. And number 3, 4 terms, no GCF to all 4 terms, so we're grouping, drawing a line after the first 2. Let me not forget, right, copy down the operation, GCF to these two terms, 9x squared, the other factor, x plus 2, and the GCF, these two terms would be 4, and negative 4 times x plus 2 would result in negative 4x minus 8. So x plus 2 is one factor, and 9x squared minus 4, the other factor. Again, dots, it keeps coming up quite a bit on this page. So that factors into 3x plus 2 times 3x minus 2. And let's not forget the x plus 2 to bring that down. And there we have factoring by grouping. Whenever you're presented with a polynomial of 4 terms, right away you're thinking factoring by grouping.